Been in operation since January 2018 and has opened up a corridor that connects landlocked Ethiopia to the maritime trade routes of the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. In Uganda, the 51-kilometre Kampala-Entebbe Expressway is one of many roads that have been built as part of the initiative. There have also been new roads built in Madagascar, Namibia and Botswana. The BRI in Africa is also geared towards improving maritime trade. New deep water ports are under construction in Lamu off Kenya's northeast coast and also in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. The Abidjan port is designed to accommodate ships carrying up to 10,000 containers, while Lamu will be East Africa's largest port with 32 berths. In addition to infrastructure development, the Belt and Road Initiative continues to open the continent further to both Chinese foreign direct investment and private sector relocation to Africa, which presents opportunities for job creation, income growth, and increasing Africa's manufacturing capacity.
And now to unpack the Belt and Road Initiative and what it means for Africa, I'm joined by Ambassador John Duku, he's South Sudan's ambassador to China, Professor Fu Jun, Academic Dean of the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development in Peking University, and Mendo Joseph Olivier, PhD candidate at the Peking University School of International Studies. Gentlemen, thank you very much and welcome to Talk Africa. Let me start by getting your thoughts, all of you, on the outcomes of the Belt and Road Initiative. It has just concluded. President Xi has spoken extensively about the future and the ambitions of the Belt and Road Initiative for participating countries. Professor Fu Jun, start off with you though. Your thoughts on the outcomes of the BRI and President Xi Jinping's speech?
Well, it was an initiative on the side of China, and now it becomes an international forum, and we have a very strong presence internationally. And in particular, Africa has a very strong presence in this forum. Now, it has roughly a quarter of state participation on the part of African countries, if I remember correctly. So certainly it's a success, and it's growing much better than the year before.
All right, Ambassador?
Well, I want to say that this is a very important initiative, which is, as the professor said, it's become a global program, not for Africa, but for the globe. Why it is important for I'm speaking as ambassador here, we see it as a clear roadmap to address the challenges facing us as Africa, especially in infrastructure areas and all the area with concerning environment, the technologies, and then accountability. These are all areas we in Africa need to look at it and benefit from it, and I think it is a very good, and I'm very happy with the outcome.
Olivier.
From my perspective, I think Africa was well represented, especially with the top 5 leaders that of the Horn of Africa and the Eastern Coast. We had Egypt, Ethiopia, Djibouti, like the top leaders, and as well as Kenya and Mozambique. I think there was a lot of, and many other representatives. And I believe that those areas, especially the Horn of Africa and the Eastern Coast, are a natural fit for such an initiative. So, yeah. Right.
Ambassador, looking at this though, because Africa was quite well represented, and as Professor Fu Jun has talked about, a quarter of African countries are now, actually not a quarter, quite a number of African countries are now members of the BRI. 37 African countries have actually signed agreements with China on the BRI. What are Africa's ambitions when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, Africa has been left behind over the years because it lacked infrastructures. Infrastructure become key vehicles for development in Africa. Africa is a vast countries, independent countries, but since independent, we in Africa, we can only connect with each other by taking plane. The commerce in Africa does not flow, of course, you cannot transport goods using the plane. Rail system does not connect Africa because we don't have rail connections. Now, with the BRI, we have opportunity. China has proven to Africa that it's really a friend indeed. Because if you see initiatives start in Africa, especially the eastern coast of Africa, look at Ethiopia, the connectivity of the railway from Djibouti to Addis Ababa. It is cut down the cost of getting goods from Djibouti to Addis and to the interior of Ethiopia. Look at Kenya. The standard gauge rail, which is starting from Mombasa now, arriving in Naivasha, proceed to Uganda and later on to South Sudan. These are all concrete steps since the BR has come to place. We are saying that it can continue for the rest of Africa, side by side with the road network. Because if you see Africa today,
Right.
and look at China, all China did was, China is a country which documents all the records of its history. And the records are there. Where China transformed from abject poverty, where population depend on food ratio, where China is not able to get enough food for itself. Today, China have enough food for itself and donate to other countries.
Let's look at that self-reliance that you talk about China. Olivier,
Yes.
looking at what the ambassador has just said, what is the potential of the BRI, though, to transform Africa's economies in the short term?
Throughout the Belt and Road Initiative, we had the Karuma. It was power stations, and it brought a lot of benefits to local people. So I think on the African side, I followed the forum, some key issues, some key concerns has been brought to the table of discussions. For example, we have the Egyptian, they call it the SC zones, which is the Suez Canal of Economic Zone. So this particularly, it's important because it connects Africa, European states, and Arab through this kind of trade cooperation. So it is important to bring that in the table of discussions, because Egypt brought the SC zone forward, especially because they included the Chinese renminbi as one of the baskets of currency of the SC zones. But I think just to name this example, I think it's a step. And Ambassador said it properly with the BRI initiative. Right. We had map roads. It brought map roads, so we can connect, because this connection, this intra-trade, this regional connection is very important for African development.
Professor Fujun, these projects are massive. Mm-hmm. When it comes to being massive, they are expensive. And there is that criticism now that Africa is falling into debt by taking on too much infrastructure, of borrowing for infrastructure from China. Is that a fair assessment? Is that a fair criticism?
Well, Chinese are open-minded at the moment, and we are listening to all kinds of criticisms or critical comments, if I may. But then in the process, we'll make adaptations, adjustment. Look at the reality of Africa as a continent. In terms of geographical size, it has roughly 23% of the total mass of the world. But in terms of railway connections, the length of railways, it's just 7% of the global total length. In terms of roads, 1/4. In terms of high-speed roads, 1/10. In terms of population's access to power, roughly 50% of the people have that. In terms of safe water, 40%. So you need to invest massively to help that continent to grow. And the growth of Africa in a way is good for the globe, because when roughly 20% of people on the global village who are rich, 80% are poor, you cannot move the agenda of growth economy forward, because supply side need to have a reasonable match with the demand side. So it's critical. Now, when you look at the debt rates, it is not China alone that is investing in Africa. In terms of the global picture, China's investment in Africa is roughly about 1/3. But when you assess the quality of debts, now this is not just a very superficial technical juggling with the numbers. You have to assess the details of the project. Is the debt accumulated for assumption or for investment to boost capacity? And you have to assess the synergy between one project and another project, so that you probably have a better chance to growth in the future. You also need to assess synergies among regions, among countries, among globe, so that you have a better assessment. And our experience from China is that China is not just has not been running just an economy. China has been running a continental economy. And in that sense, China had the experience that it's so critical to invest in infrastructure first in the hope that private business will come along, such that you create jobs and you have more value-added manufacturing jobs, and then you grow together.
Right. Ambassador, your thoughts on the criticism regarding debt?
Those who are making this criticism, let's look back where we're coming from. BRI is just a new initiative, but Africa got independent from 60s to this date. And the question and the deficit of the road infrastructures and the IMF and the World Bank, which is the main vehicle for borrowing before BRI come up, all the projects in Africa, if we talk about debt burden or debt trap, I think I can speak for Africa that we have records that the debts Africa is having today is not from China. If there is the terminology, debt traps can be used for anywhere, it should be associated with the IMF and World Bank. Because you look at the structural adjustment policy, which was draconian policy imposed on Africa, it is the one which has hindered the development infrastructures in many African countries. But for Africa to move forward within the context of BRI, we must look at the regional projects. If we look at the deep port of Lamu, it is so important for us to have this deep port in Lamu to decongest Mombasa. Because we in South Sudan, as a landlocked country, we depend on Mombasa. Congo depend on Mombasa. Many other African countries depend on Mombasa.
Right. Olivier, your thoughts?
Yeah, concerning the debt trap, I will partly agree with what Professor said, because Chinese investment in Africa, Chinese financing is an option considering there are many other key actors in Africa. So Chinese involvement in Africa, covering a range of trades or infrastructure, I think it is able to boost, at least it is able to boost the African economy, to bring up the African economic growth. But so I think that's why I do believe that African nations, all the African nations with the sustainable development plan, is definitely most likely to benefit from the initiative. So I don't really think it is a debt trap. You know, as long as every African country with a sustainable development in its national policy, they definitely additionally benefiting from it.
Gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment. Yeah. We'll take a short break. Our discussion continues in a moment. Do stay with us.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. We're discussing the Belt and Road Initiative and its implication for African countries. Still with me in studio, Professor Fu Jun. Also with me, Ambassador Duku and Joseph Olivier Mendo. We'll continue with this discussion. Professor Fu Jun, one of the 12 sub-thematic forums, the Digital Silk Road. Now, this is expected to merge the virtual versus the reality. How's that going to work?
Well, it's so critical because we have been talking about flying geese. In other words, when you have comparative advantage of labor, resources, but the window of opportunity is closing very rapidly for those countries who tend to think we have advantages because AI is coming. So when you build the physical dimension of a Belt and the Road, there you are talking about the railways, ports, the kind of hard side of infrastructure. It is so important also to get the digital side of the connection up and running. And this is the next round of business years down the road. So digital is very important. And China has experience to get our people connected through the digital world. And we are moving out to build those Belt and Road initiative. And it's so also very critical, such that African countries are not lagging behind again in the digital world. So you have to roll out simultaneously the physical, the land-based connection, the sea-based the connection, and also the digital world. It's very important.
In terms of the digital world, Ambassador, many are going to be asking African countries in terms of internet connectivity and technology are at varied levels of development. What impact is this likely to have for African countries, and how exactly are African countries going to join with the Silk Road when they don't have that quality connectivity as yet?
Well, Africa cannot remain island because there are challenges facing Africa on infrastructure of the IT. Therefore, we are very glad here that as Africans, during this forum, the Ethiopian Prime Minister met with Jack Ma and then with the Alibaba and moving in that direction, because Alibaba is a driving engine in China IT development. And yes, you say correctly, we are interested and will continue to be interested to be part and parcel of this process. Kenya has brought positive contribution to BRI. When you look at what they call M-Pesa money transfer, this is Kenyan initiatives, which has now taken over the work what the bank is doing. A rural community are able to transfer money, receive money. A businesswoman, a businessman in a rural area can be able to transfer and receive money to do business, improve livelihood. And this is already a building block toward the president
of developed countries. How is this going to work for the continent?
Our cooperation with China include capacity building, include technology transfer. So those are the factors which will drive that engine. I have said in the beginning, China started from lower level. When China invests in infrastructures, invests in technology, those technology which China already have advanced, we don't need to invent the wheel. We benefit from our partner China, the technology it has, the knowledge it has, transfer to us in Africa. We also benefit from it, so that over the years, Africa is not able to adopt this technology from Western technology point of view.
Right. I want to get your thoughts here, Olivier, as one of Africa's young people. What are your thoughts?
So from the youth perspective, I would take an example of e-commerce. There were a variety of projects from China and that were willing to be implemented in Africa, especially in the East Africa. And they faced these kind of challenges that they were struggling in implementing while we are still in 4G, while we are in 4, 5, we're moving towards a 5G here, and there we're still in 3G or 2. So I think capacity buildings and the technology transfer, because we learn from each other, we learn from China as well. The BRI is also such a platform. It provides a platform to learn from each other, like for people-to-people relationship, also, exchanging knowledge. So I think it would work, but it might need time.
It will need time. Yeah. So, Professor Fujun, do you see Africa leapfrogging the industrialization age now that we are talking about the Silk Road? Do you see Africa leapfrogging the industrialization age, because Africa is yet to become fully industrialized, and yet the rest of the world is now talking about the digital technology, the fourth industrial revolution, for instance?
Well, I look at my own country, and I also look at the African continent. In the African continent, roughly 70% of your exports are resource-based. And that was very similar in China, 1979, 40 years ago. But how do you start with that base and gradually go through a process called industrialization? In the Chinese case, we start with the labor-intensive, then capital-intensive, then now it's a bit of knowledge-intensive. But as I indicated, now this is sort of a gradual process of industrialization, so called the flying geese pattern. But with the AIs coming, probably it's more problematic for those countries who are in the business to catch up. So I guess there is a chance for African countries to close that gap by moving simultaneously. You have to find pockets where you do labor-intensive operations, and also you need to try a bit in terms of technology, intensive, and the knowledge sharing is so important. Otherwise, Africa countries probably will be left further behind. So it's very critical since the window of opportunity is closing rapidly.
Window of opportunity is closing rapidly. What are African countries doing, Ambassador?
Well, I believe that despite what the Professor said, I see opportunity for Africa. I see opportunity for Africa because we have the young generation in Africa who are already spending more time in IT and they're interested in advanced IT. What made today China is what it is today is because of the young Chinese who has advanced interest in IT and perfect it and move it. In Africa, I don't see hopeless case. I see opportunity for us. What we need from our government is to invest in our young people and to give priority to the IT in our various institutions to tap that opportunity and build the capacity. If you look at Rwanda today, Rwanda is one star in Africa because the IT development in Rwanda made Rwanda what it is today in Africa. That's when people talk about Rwanda. It's not because of Rwanda has done miracle. They invest in the young people. They invest in IT. And that success story in Rwanda is African success. So we can benefit from that success of Rwanda to see how we can replicate it in that African country.
I'm going to get a final winding up comment from all of you. Let me start off with you, Olivier. Where do you see the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and China over the next 5 years? Where do you see China and Africa reinforcing each other with this initiative?
From this 2019 forum, as compared to the 2017, like this is, you got your first answer. Like there are more and more people joining the initiative. So in 5 years, I see more and more African getting more involved in the cooperation with China, especially considering the fact that we young people and Chinese and African young people are interacting, people-to-people exchanges. So the movement are frequent. We have direct flights from Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, and maybe with this initiative, we will have more connections. So in 5 years, I do see some progress. Of course, we will be facing some challenges, but I do see progress, especially because we African, we have the young people, we have the youth. So in 5 years, I think we're going to make it, we're going to have more participation from African countries.
Ambassador.
Well, I want to say that I want to concur with my colleagues here, Olivia, that there's a brighter future for Africa. We see future for Africa within the BRI. We see Africa emerging in the next few years out of this. But I want to say this, in terms of the transparency, accountability, and sustainability, it is so important that African country alliance, we realign our priorities with the BRI so that it is able to benefit from this project. Because if we don't realign the priority of the country, because priority of the countries has to be realigned. And then the regional flag projects also need to be realigned with the BRI. Now, when you look at it, there are some unique initiatives, such as, for example, in South Sudan. We are saying that we have crude oil for development. We are introducing a new idea, crude oil for development. South Sudan is producing oil. Our oil is sold in the international market. When the resources come from the oil to the treasury, it is now being used in the competing priorities. There are so many priorities in the government. Road is priorities, education is a priority, health is a priority, agriculture, food security is a priority. So it becomes difficult to refocus what is number one priority. So we are saying now, we decide as a country, for example, 30,000 barrels of crude oil per day will be put aside for infrastructure development, and this money will be kept in China. And when we go for projects in South Sudan undertaken by the Chinese company, it will be paid by this money which is here in China. This does not take any concession loan from China.
You have the final word, very briefly.
Well, looking back in China, then probably do a little projection in Africa. When I look back in China, it took us roughly 10 years to start and preparing the ground to consolidate. We start with the special economic zones in Shenzhen, unleashing labor from the countryside and get the country connected a little bit. Then we had some very robust models win models for others to learn. Now remember, for most people to learn, they need to see concrete results. And I hope in next 5 years, every country will have a range of quick wins such that the rest of Africa can see those wins and repeat those processes. It's so critical. Once we lay down infrastructure, now it's time for private business to follow. Once you have 2 dimensions and you have a good recipe for sustainable development. Now, even when you have debts, you have the capacity to pay debts. So as far as I project, if everything goes well, and I would assess the chances very high there, we'll have quick wins, and those quick wins will repeat it to the rest of the African continent.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. Very lively discussions there. And that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. But thank you to my guests for their insights. Ambassador John Duku, South Sudan's ambassador to China. Professor Fu Jun, Academic Dean of the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development from Peking University. And Joseph Olivier Mendo, PhD candidate at the Peking University School of International Studies. Remember, we'd also love to hear your feedback through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. And you can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. To keep the conversation going, and tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Beijing, it's goodbye. Thank you for joining us.